night. You know, as I said before, Abhishek and I'll have to stay up, and as it is, I've been up since 4:30 this morning. So you'll reflect on your grades if you make me stay up again.
No.
Okay, I think it's. Abhishek, should we start? Or
Yes,
I think
5
it's.
minutes be there.
Yeah. So I think, you know, first let's pick up on the second lecture. The second lecture. It's just sorry, no, I'll be back. Sorry. Yeah, any. Okay, so as I said, I think we should start with Ashish Nandi's reading of yesterday, because what Bill Gramy is referring to is actually Ashish Nandi's argument made in that essay, and not what the second one which we have for today is something Ashish Nandi wrote later after all kinds of reactions he got. But Bill Gramy, as I said, in that long 2-day workshop on secularism organized at the IIA's Shimla, it was the earlier essay of Ashish Nandi that Bill Gramy is in conversation with. Not just the one we had for yesterday, but several others he'd written around the same time, arguing for more or less the same things. Why? Because it had a lot of impact, as again Bill Gramy also mentions. It had a lot of impact because, as I said, his subtle distinction between the religion as faith and religion as ideology. Not just that, the 4 examples he gives of different kinds of people who are religious, privately and not so outside, who are religious both privately, publicly. The ones who are the worst kind, according to him, who are not religious at all but use it, etc., etc. So it had a lot of influence there. But on the other hand, it was also misunderstood. That given the charged situation, again, as I said, you have to place it in that charged context, of processes that led up to the Babri Masjid and more, after that, after the demolition of the masjid. So the extremely charged kind of situation. So the moment he says that, secularism, as an outside, concept or idea that's come from outside doesn't work for India, some immediately labeled him with the Hindu right, and others thought that, just picked on this idea of that secular is not a concept that applies to India. Okay, so you have to keep that in mind, and Bill Gramy precisely is taking very seriously Nandi's arguments. Yes. He's taking very seriously Nandi's arguments. So before I move on to Bill Gramy, I would like to, speak a little bit about Ashish Nandi's first essay, which we had yesterday afternoon, which we didn't really have time to discuss. Because this is primarily the one Bill Gramy is in conversation with. So I must say, when I suggested Bill Gramy, it was immediately Abhishek's idea to put the two of them together so we can have another round of debate in class on the two very different viewpoints. Yes. Anyone, please? Shomjyoti, you said you'd come prepared to speak on.
No, I didn't
yes,
say
that's what you said, that we didn't have time to discuss Ashish Nandi and.
I said I read it thinking that was the primary.
Yeah.
No, I mean, the problem with Ashish Nandi, I find, is like, he comes from a very elitist position that, everybody will have the knowledge that he has and then will act accordingly and still be anti-modern. And his problem with development is something I have a problem with. Like, if there is no broadening of the base of education and industrialization and things like that, then how on earth are we going to have people coming out of the, from slightly less privileged background, and then I mean, and that's my point. I mean, I think this whole point of access to certain medium of articulation and wealth and prosperity and education and I think he doesn't take into account. He considers that everybody will be as knowledgeable, and then things will happen and we will all be nice without any kind of modernization. And then I mean, that's the whole idea. I have
More than that, I think he has a very romanticized notion of the non-modern. I find very serious problems with it. As I know him very well, but he's always making this distinction. If you remember the how he starts the second article, which by the way Pratik included, I don't like it at all because of the tone, because of the sweeping generalization. Here he doesn't care. No. Sometimes he's seriously engaging, then at times he just doesn't care. He says whatever he wants to. So and moves on. But he has this thing of, he makes a very clear distinction between academics and intellectuals, right? So he would say, you are an academic and I am an intellectual. Okay. Why am I academic? Because you are a trained historian by profession, right? And history is among the worst things of modernity that you can think of. And I'll give you here his arguments about history, because the interesting thing is, history conquers the past completely and seeks to represent the past as if it is the version of history, of academic discipline of history is the only version, and not just that it is a language of certitude. Okay, so that's his problem with any what he thinks is a trope of modernity. Not just classification, but the language of certitude and certainty, while he is constantly speaking of ambiguity, ambivalence, uncertainty, and not just uncertainty. In History's Forgotten Doubles, it's actually quite a very engaging piece. Whether you agree or don't agree, try and look it up. History's Forgotten Doubles. He's speaking of how even in ancient India or otherwise, our early imaginings of the past, or think of the Ramayana and the Mahabharata. There's no triumph of victory at the end. This idea of progress he associates I think very wrongly, or just by analogy, or with modernity, with history, etc., etc. I have to try to tell him that history does not always speak in the language of not just of certainty, but also of triumph. But that's his idea, that earlier in his in earlier reckonings of the past, the passing of the era was marked by a sadness and and ambiguity and ambivalence, which in his understanding of history, is completely missing. This academic discipline of history. So if you remember the way he begins his second article, he's saying, I'm grappling with problems of the everyday man and not, the theoretical abstractions of academics, right? Elites. So and I tried to tell him that. I said, what are you? Okay, you're an intellectual and I'm an academic, but what are you if not, if you do not belong to the group of elites? I sort of say that, he's fearless, that I am also fearless in putting these questions to him, but he sort of says that he has a kind of indulgence towards me, so he accepts, he doesn't answer. But the other thing is, I said, what kind of non-history along with the non-modern are you projecting? And besides, you are completely limiting the idea of history, what you think history is as an academic discipline. The same problem, without engaging with it completely. If you think of Minalal's the history of history, it's along the same line. Again, very engaging argument. But the point is, the non-modern, and therefore whatever we had before is non-history, right? Whereas in my own book, as I said, the Religion, Law and Power book, I say that if we rule out different parts of historical consciousness, what is a historical consciousness? The very different ways people try to understand, negotiate, deal with the past and see their relevance in their current lives, right? So if you rule all that out, history, right, and something non-modern, you are not allowing history to take into all histories that take into consideration all these different pathways of historical consciousness as history. That's what we are pushing for. That it's not as if they didn't exist. The point is that we do not recognize them as history. I said, so you're forcefully denying an entire body of scholarship that's continued for a very long time. Right? So I said it's your very, very limited sense of history that you are imposing on the academic discipline on history and on all historians per se. So Bill Graham's point is in a very different way. As I said, he's an analytic philosopher, extremely senior, so he comes from a totally different background than mine. His point is also the same, that just by challenging, saying that the modern is bad and everything that's come with the modern and modernity is bad is not going to solve the actual problems we are facing today, because it means a lack of engagement with what is happening. Although he's saying that he is engaging with it, and something I pointed to yesterday, that this distinction between religion as faith, religion as a way of life, and religion as ideology. It functions only at a discursive level. And I've asked him that. I said, don't you think that people who follow religion as faith also subscribe to religion as ideology? So where does and they can be, in your terms, non-modern and modern simultaneously. But then he'll go back to think of the ravages of modernity. Fine, we can think of the ravages of modernity and we can think that, it's terrible. But the point that what you were trying to say, that certain things are here to stay. And Bill Graham is also saying that this means that there's a total lack of engagement with what these other notions, concepts, and actual practices are trying to tell you. That's Bill Graham's problem, I think, with his idea of, he's saying you are not addressing the question. Just saying that the idea of the secular or secularism is a modern Western concept, and therefore all our problems of India today are related to that. You are not engaging with the actual problems at all. So, so that I was having said that, I think on the other hand, I mean, Bill Graham also engages with it very seriously, because, as I said, it had a lot of influence then. But unfortunately, he was picked up by both sides, right? One, the problem is with these polemical things, not of none of these, I'm saying the charged situation of the country then, it's like, whose side are you on? And something I've been insisting from the beginning. The moment you say, whose side are you on, there's no dialogue. You are either this or that, but you can't be, I accept a part of this and I accept a part of that because I want to reason with both. Right. So the moment you say, I'm not a secularist, of course, he's using, that means he's using secularism as a pejorative term now. People were saying that, Gandhi has become Hindu-right, which he never has and never would be, because again, you do not engage with the subtleties of his argument. So that was the problem with when this debate happened. I must say it was an extremely rich debate. If you ever have the time, although now things again have changed over this period, if you ever have the time, just read the Secularism and its Critique book seriously, because there you will see how people are trying to grapple precisely with the way, the Indian state adopts, why it adopts, what happens, and, why the problems, what we call the crisis of secularism. So it's a big fat book which came out of primarily of that 2-day conference in Shimla, but they also invited others to write, because I don't think I saw Ashish Gandhi there. His essay had come out before the conference, yes. Anyway, so he is, so according to Bill Graham, I'll leave you to speak more on Ashish Gandhi after this. I'll give what I understood of Bill Graham, that this religion as faith, not only, I find it incredible that someone who's questioning modernity, not questioning, rejecting modernity and its binaries and very well-defined categorical positions, what he thinks, constantly, is doing the same. Modern, non-modern, right? Faith and religion as ideology. And what is he saying? And Will is saying his idea of this religion as faith, as something innocent and non-modern and pure. Right? So for me, it's another binary you are setting up. Doesn't work. Similarly, as the binaries of modernity do not work. Your binary of religion as faith, religion as a way of life, but something that's non-modern and very pure and very innocent. Something I had mentioned, there's no going back. And Wilgrami is saying it in very different ways, that there is nothing like a very pure, innocent past that we can recover, because we do not know what that past was like exactly, right? So that's Wilgrami's point, that this distinction he sets, Nandi sets up between religion as faith, as something very innocent and non-modern and pure, versus religion as ideology of the Muslim League or the RSAs, which is intolerant of heterodoxy outside and within, right? Both heterodoxy outside and within, which is true, because they both strive for uniformity. There to that extent, Nandi is right. But as I said, it's a binary which can only function at a discursive level. It doesn't really work. It doesn't really work. Okay. So, but this religion as ideology goes hand in hand with Nandi's modernist secularism. But the other important point that Wilgrami is saying, that his critique of any kind of religion as ideology, be it the Muslim League or the RSS, actually has a second side to it, which is the one Wilgrami is most disturbed by. It's as if this idea of the secular state imposed from above is partly responsible for the rise of religion or of ideology, and which is exactly how he was picked up by many who said that, oh, he's become completely right. And there is no, what Wilgrami is trying to show is, there is no connection whatsoever. And that's what he's saying, that you're missing the point if you're just blaming everything on modernity and romanticizing a non-modern as great and pure, because it's just a discursive construct. So, Hindu nationalism, therefore, is a special instance of the more general wrong that is nationalism itself. That I agree, because again, his other problem is with nationalism, the idea of nationalism. He has a book called, I think most of you know, The Legitimacy of Nationalism, where he deals with Rabindranath, precisely. He's analyzing Rabindranath's writings on the nation nationalism. A modern state of mind in which the very ideal of nation has built into it, meaning that a modern state of mind, nationalism is a modern state of mind in which the very idea of the nation has, is ingrained, right? So the second implication of Wilgrami's argument is that it's not Hindu nationalism per se, it's nationalism of any kind that is to blame. Right? So again, he thinks that you are missing the issue. You are not actually dealing with what's happening in India. So Hindu nationalism as a piece of a piece with this critique of Nehruvian secularism. That's the second problem. So nationalism of any kind, and secularism again as a very modern and therefore terrible concept. Both. Okay. So nationalism is in dialectical relation with the other product of modernity, according to Wilgrami. It's not just nationalism. Hindu nationalism, therefore, is in dialectical relation with this other product of modernity, which is Nehruvian secularism, as an alien imposition. So, according to Wilgrami, this is a terribly strenuous simplification in Nandi's understanding of nationalism. Absolutely. He's saying no, he's not looking at all into the different ways nations and nationalisms get constructed at different moments, drawing upon very different elements. Not just that, he's also speaking about their very different ends and purposes, and the very differential effects produced by nationalism in different groups and societies, precisely because of the very difference in the ways they're constructed, why they're constructed, with what purpose to what end, and the differential effects. So that is why he's calling this, just categorizing, bland categorizing of anything, which you think is nationalism, a strenuous simplification, not attention to details of any kind. Okay, so strenuous simplification and this insistence that nationalism was the bad seed that turned the more pristine Hinduism and Islam into communal ideologies in contemporary India. That's Bill Graham's idea, which is true, that nationalism of any kind, it's like Hindu nationalism or Muslim fundamentalism or nationalism, whatever you want to call it, is just the fruition of the bad seed being planted by nationalism. Right? Very modern. So, and he's also pointing out that despite Gandhi's abhorrence of Hindu nationalism, he shares one idea with it. That is that nationalism is a single element. Single element that may be transparently grasped. So when he calls it a strenuous simplification, that's what he's meant. And he says this is also why people thought it become, Hindu right in that sense. That nationalism is one singular element which you can grasp transparently, which applies again the same way everywhere, which is he's speaking of the very different ways they are constituted and the very different effects they have and the very different ends and purposes they serve. Okay. So different kinds of nationalism and their differential effects and purposes. More importantly, according to me, and I think this is something very, very important that Bill Graham is pointing to, and this has come up. When we say Hinduism is a construction, what we mean. And on the other hand, people also say that there are many shared elements, right, upon which we draw, even when we are constructing something. Everything that way is a construction. But the other important part, which I also mentioned, that the constructions do not just float around. They acquire a life of their own. That's the second part of it. But what Bill Graham is pointing to is that on what are they based? Right? So they are based on certain long-standing structures, ideas, practices. And one very important element on which laterism, if we call it, as a construct is drawing upon, according to Bill Graham, the most important element was this, let's say, the superiority of a certain Brahmanical ideology, and also in real terms. Let's say the caste practices, etc., hierarchy practices. So this is something that has layers and layers and has combined and transformed over very long periods, and hence which predates colonialism and modernity. So, Nandi therefore falls in his own trap. In that sense, it's very simplistic, because his first his periodization of the modern and the non-modern, it's never very clear, and second is very arbitrary. Right? So I think this is something very important that even when I read Bill Graham for the first time, I hadn't thought of very seriously. That constructs are not just floating in the air. Saying constructs are totally fused into polity and society. And how do they get fused into polity and society? That I always say, that they acquire a very material and very powerful life of their own. That bit I had thought about. But why do they acquire that, that life, powerful force of their own? Is because they are based on something that also has existed in very different ways and has come up in different ways, but it predates the modern or the onset of colonial rule or anything. So this for me, when I read it again today, I found that this is something very, very important. He is pointing to, Bill Grammy is pointing to. So this construct, therefore, is the result of deep-seated and long-standing layers of construction over centuries, of Brahmanical Hinduism, through very different paths, through contestations, everything. All that is granted. But the point is, this base was there. And think of the residual effect Pinnick is implying. Again, that why do they acquire such force at particular moments? It's the same thing, in a different way. So, but so he predates. So this predates modernity, and gives Hinduism as a construct a particular structure. He says a construct doesn't mean, as I said, that it's something totally malleable and effaceable, right? But a construct is something that is fused into polity, and often as entrenched as anything else that we think is not a construct. So I think this is a very crucial point that Bill Grammy is making. Because we often, he says that we often try to get away from something. Vishram is something we don't like by saying it's a construct. But just by saying it's a construct doesn't mean that it disappears. It's there, and we have to deal with it as to why is it there, right? So so it's not anything that can be erased or effaced just by saying it's a construct. So. Hence the need to combat it within the options available, okay, instead of a return to some earlier period, which Bill Grammy says again paradoxically is also a construct, right? So hence for him, Gandhi's arguments are missing the point completely. They're not really engaging with. So he's saying, even if we think it's a construct, we have to see first why it has taken such, why is it so entrenched? And two, if we accept that, we have to, deal with it, within the parameters of what is available. So again, just, dismissing secularism as something imposed from above or even outside is not going to solve our problems. So how is he trying to deal with it? So Nehruvian secularism, now he comes up with his own critique of Nehruvian secularism. But mind you, he's saying that he's not criticizing the secular, because he's saying it is some notion of the secular is very much here. Again, it's something that is fused into polity. So one, we have to go into in what ways, how, what other elements that make it, just as what he says, Brahmanical Hinduism or Brahman, the superiority of the upper caste is the element on which this notion, let's say, of a Hinduism that has existed for periods rests. Then what are the elements, ideas, notions on which the idea, the secular also rests in contemporary India? It's the same problem. Just saying it's a construct, not going to solve our problems. So let us see why, in spite of being constructs, they have such force. That's the point. And here he says that the Nehruvian secularism is a holding process. Why is it a holding process? Something that is just holding somehow. But why? And there he is right, I think, he said, because it is not only not insufficiently, it's not only insufficiently thought out, but insufficiently it has engaged with and dealt with. And that is the problem. He said there's no negotiation. We always said, again, maybe this is another construct or it's our elitist bias. We thought that Indian democracy is based on a consensus. And what is a consensus? Consensus is where several parties, several people give their opinions, and you may not agree with everything, right? You may not agree with everything, but you say that given the logics of the situation or given the current condition, etc., I do not agree with your point of view, but I see, let's say, the viability of it. So it's not exactly a compromise. Compromise is you give up a bit, I give up a bit. Consensus is, on the other hand, as I said, I say that I see the logic to your argument, but that does not mean that I agree. Yet, let's say, for whatever is in question or the issue or the common good, I think that what you are saying is viable for the business issue. That is how you reach a consensus, according to my view. And so he's saying that this idea of the secular is not a result of this kind of serious engagement with negotiation with different voices and different viewpoints. So that is why it is just a holding process. Remember, I said that there were also different imaginings of independent India, and it was questioned severely that what kind of independent India we want. And again, it was the urgency or the necessity to become independent first that pushed all these other very important issues under the table. So Bill Gramy is making a similar kind of point, and hence it's a holding process. We just let's become independent first. And the other important thing is that the Congress's idea, this you can find in any book. Aisha Talal showed it, I've shown it in my book in a very different way. But the point is that the Congress's idea, and I wouldn't say right or wrong, the Congress always presented itself as an all India organization, right from the beginning and till the end, and hence the lack of negotiation. See, as an all India organization, and the Congress always felt that it's an umbrella organization that accommodated different views. So you had the Congress right, you had the Congress center, and you had the Congress left, of course. And the Congress right, as we know, there were many leaders who are also members of the Hindu Mahasabha. The Congress center, you had again strong characters, and Subhash Bose and Nehru would be slightly thought, of course, to the Congress left, definitely. To the Congress left, but not, I don't know how left was their leftism, but certainly the Congress left, right? So given this position, if you remember again, the Congress felt, see, by the time it's founded, it also thinks that religion and customs, etc., social issues cause dissension. So it's right from the beginning that it's a decision of the Congress not to discuss what it thinks are religious and social issues. So it's not just Nehru, it's a Congress's decision, because we are an all India political party, and of course wrongly, but the idea is we just ask for deal with political issues. Meaning ask for greater representation of Indians in the administrative service, etc., etc. The institutional reform should go this way or that way, but never include social issues, which can be religious, of course, and hence dangerous. That will take away from the Congress's stance of an all India secular party. Yes. So this many of us have pointed out in our work. So, which is why when Gandhi introduces the issue of untouchability as a part of the Congress program, there are other leaders questioning it. It's the same thing. Is it a religious issue, social issue? We still haven't resolved that problem. We'll have it in the second session. Caste, religious, social, political, what is it? So other leaders actually are questioning, why should we have the issue of untouchability as a part of a Congress program? All India struggle. So we forget all these histories. And as I said, when I reread Bill Gramy, somewhere I knew, but I hadn't paid enough attention to this. So when I said that there was a complacency on our part, that we thought we are naturally secular, this is what it had come out of. It was not sufficiently thought of. I agree completely. Yes, please.
Gandhi's support for the Khilafat.
There was very serious questions, the very, very serious questions. Absolutely. Very serious questions. And the Bengal Congress, it was Chittaranjan Das who actually gets the Bengali leaders to agree at the very last moment. Absolutely, no question on that. And so yes, so this is what Bilrami is pointing to, and I think it is very, it's a very important point. It's a fundamental point which we often overlook, because as I said, I also said that we thought we are naturally secular. Goes back to the Congress position. It also meant that the Congress was extremely unwilling. We see it as the Congress's terrible, what should I say, lack of flexibility or authoritarianism, not willing to listen to other voices, not just the Muslim League. Why this problem with the Dalits and Ambedkar? Same thing. We represent all of India. Think of Gandhi's encounter with Ambedkar. Not just the roundtable conference before that. And he is saying the ones who claim that they represent, read his words. Is a Congress stance. So this is what we look upon as, Congress mistake and Congress authoritarianism and the lack of, the total lack of will on the part of the Congress to listen to other voices. Which is absolutely true, but the point is the Congress is insisting, and wrongly, you suppress other voices because you claim you're representing all of India. And the Dalits also probably would have broken away, as I said. It's not just, Jinnah and the Muslim League. 1937, read what happens after the, UP elections, because they had been working together. They had similar views of, some vague socialist notion, both total aristocrats, no doubt about that. But so when Jinnah goes, he just thought that, they'd be included in the Congress ministry. So when he raises that issue, by then the Congress is so confident of its success and so full of its success that it says that you have to give up your league membership and your separate identity completely if you wish to join us. So all those histories we know, as historians, those details I was aware of. But this point that, why the Congress is saying, we also question why are they being so inflexible, rightly or wrongly. And that is his point, that, this idea of the secular, therefore, is not at all negotiated or properly thought out or worked out. So you see, it's a very different position from saying that, it's something that's come from outside and is just transplanted or imported and imposed on us. So for which, as I said, I think Bilrami is extremely important, because we have to ask ourselves these questions, which is why he calls it a holding on process. Similarly, as I said, first freedom and then we'll see. Have we managed to work out the problems? No. Same thing. First freedom and let's see. But we are obviously secular. The point is, we are not obviously secular because we haven't reflected enough of what it means to be secular in the conditions of India, right? Which is what I was saying, that each society, each state has to work it out its own way. But I was pointing to how to work it out. But what the part that I had not thought of, and Bilrami is pointing to, is, from much before how it is, how it has come up, taken roots or not taken roots, right? So, do you want to comment before I go on? Oh, we have time, no? Any comments on this? No? Okay. Anyone? Yes.
Just regarding on the segment from Bilrami, I want your observations on this. So this is basically the issue with which you have been engaging from the very beginning of your lecture today. This is page 383 of Bilrami's lecture. So
sorry, today I didn't bring the computer, but anyway.
You can see it on the laptop.
Yeah, sorry.
That was Nehru's primary contribution then. Bilrami is responding basically to Nandi, but then I believe that this is a particular segment which is his own thoughts. That was Nehru's primary contribution then. a perversely modernist and rationalist imposition of a vision that was foreign to the natural tendencies of Hinduism and Islam. In their traditional postmodern spiritual and societal formations, a vision accompanied by all the destructive modern institutional commitment to the centralized government. Okay? As far as the notion of the centralized government, I can understand, but I believe that this state's imposition of a version of a secular, which almost takes the place of religion. So see, you have Hindus, Muslims, all these religions, except religions, and then.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Sorry, carry on.
No.
Carry on.
And its response? It's built. Yeah. So,
yes, please carry on.
So I believe that I'm just curious to listen from you on this a statist imposition of secularism as if it was a religion.
No, here actually he is recounting in his own terms Ashish Nandi's arguments.
Yeah.
This is not Bill Grami's point.
Of course, this is the very beginning of the lecture, so it cannot be exactly found out.
Earlier he's saying the critique would say, and the critique meaning Ashish Nandi here.
Okay.
Yes.
Even if it is, whether it is his response to Ashish or it is his reading of the article that was written by Nandi, or maybe his own thoughts on the state of affairs in India of Nehru's time, I just want your observation because you have been basically negotiating with all, this issue from the very beginning of the lecture. A statist imposition of secularism as if it was a very new religion based on scientific principles, which the people of a newly independent country could have accepted for a solid foundation.
See, I don't think that Bill Grami agrees completely that it was a statist imposition to a certain extent. As I said, his point is that it was not based on consensus, negotiation, or compromise. So it did not, in that sense, it was. But I don't think he agrees with Nehru's idea of it, Nandi's idea of a total imposition.
What I'm saying is that in Nandi's article, Nandi is very critical of many of the ideas associated with Nehru and Gandhi. Bill Grami, as much as I could understand after reading his piece, is that he is in a defensive position. He says that it's easy to criticize Nehru for many of the things that the nation has discovered of late. But then there are good things with Nehru which possibly we missed. But I'm curious to understand the thing that whether Nehru was very keen on imposing, even if forcefully, a statist idea of secularism, new idea based on Nehru's, toying with the ideas of scientific science and modernity. So, which could actually replace the age-old religions that this nation followed.
Age-old religions, no, but Nehru, yes, as I said, he's a very modern man, and he thought the progress of education and the scientific temper caste would disappear. Just read Discovery of India. He's writing it, just prior to independence, and there he's giving his vision. You can see this man, ready to step into the position of total leadership, and that's why I said that no one challenged the idea of a very strong state. So no, like as a religion, no. But yes, he felt that, as I said, the growth of, the spread of scientific temper through education and employment. He says that we have to deal with, for India to be a new nation and modern in that sense, we have to, just as we have to take several things from our past, we also have to do away with several things of our past. And he says caste is one of those. But he also says that the spread of education and scientific temper will automatically kind of do away with caste. Okay, so his imposition is to that extent. As I said, what Bill Grami is saying, it was not properly thought out. This acceptance that it will become naturally secular with the progress of science and education. More comments? You can take this back, thank you. Or would you want to look at it if there are more comments? So you take it back, because I know the reading quite well, but I
been carrying the computer every day and this hasn't come out. So today I didn't bring it, but I'll bring it in the second session. Yeah, thank you very much. More comments? Because yes, this does call for debate, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, so you see, what Bilgrami is trying to say is that just as Ashin Nandi was criticized for the wrong reasons, instead of conjure up a pure, non-modern, if we can return to it as if everything will be solved. And that's why he's saying that it's the same kind of fallacy to think that, almost like Nehru, that, with education and employment, we will become naturally secular. So what he's saying that we're not reflecting on the basis and then, negotiate also, in that sense, consensus. You're refusing to hear other voices, who, that are saying that, they have very different notions of the secular. So that's his primary critique of which is why it's a holding process, and it hasn't worked.
For how long would you believe?
We don't know. That's what I'm saying. It's a basic challenge before us. It's a very serious challenge. But unfortunately, maybe a few of us in the class will start reflecting on these issues. But yes, sir.
Extending process, which kind of try to keep the monster of this communalism.
I don't believe in this, as I said right at the beginning, this division of, nationalism. There's something like pure nationalism, which is, great and noble, and there's something like communalism, which is terrible. Because I've said, how do you construct the imagined community? On the basis of something that you think is communal or communitarian. It's only here that we have to, exactly, yes. So that's what I'm saying. So I don't believe in that binary at all. In fact, I've been arguing against setting up, all these very well-defined kind of categorizations that absolutely, what should I say, come in the way of any kind of dialogue. And that is what Bilgrami is pointing to, that the mistake that Nehru or the Congress Party made then was their unwillingness to listen to several other voices. And that's what he said. But on the other hand, the Congress had this stance from the beginning, which was obviously wrong. When it began, is fine. When it began, it was nothing. It was an annual gathering of of lawyers and professionals, just an annual convention. And the other idea of not paying attention or not fostering any kind of interest, vested interest. Remind you, the Congress president had to come from a different region. For example, if the Congress annual session is being held in Bombay, the president has to be from another part of India. We often forget this issue. So it's not just social religious issues. It's like neutrality, whatever sense it had of neutrality. So if it's being held in Madras, then the president has to be elected from some other region. So this is a very different way of, forging the idea of India as in united. Yes, so Congress is consciously the first all India political organization, right? So the problems he says are with this, that they never thought of it. They just assume that this will work. So what we are facing now is that obviously it has not worked. Right? And so we have to reflect on why it hasn't worked. And not just that, and what he says, work out a viable alternative within the framework available now. Just to wish away, right? By saying these are all constructs, not going to make them disappear. Millions of people, believe in certain things in particular ways. So we have to understand why they do, when, what are the other factors that they believe in them in this particular way at that particular moment. Which is what, I was saying, Talal Asad's point was that it's not even, Hinduism as a way of life is not exactly the similar uniform way all of us do, even at the same moment. No. and it changes over time, constantly. So if we keep in mind this, the constantly, contingent way in which certain elements combine and gain tremendous force, then I think a lot of our problems would get resolved there, won't even arise. But the point is, we have to try and work out a viable alternative within the framework we have. You think just by declaring India, a Hindu Rashtra will solve the problem? Right? That is Bill Brahmi's point. Right? It's just you create another construct. So, Nehruvian secularism, therefore, an imposition only in the sense, to come back to your point, that it was not the result of negotiation between different communities. The same thing I mentioned about, the uniform code. What is uniform? Who is it uniform for? We don't ask these questions. Nivedita Menon was saying, if we pick on the most, let's say, the best elements in each, personal law of different communities, and then think of forming an uniform code, it will be a different uniform code, right? And this is what he's precisely saying, that if we had listened, if Nehru, not just Nehru, the Congress party had listened to different communities, different voices as to what they thought, and then come to an arrangement of the secular, it would have functioned differently. Of course, he's a philosopher, and of course, maybe his is also a utopian vision, but the point is we never did that. So we don't know which way we would have gone if that had happened. We also do not know, which way we would have gone if we had decided on the kind of India we want after independence, before just pushing for independence, right? These are imponderables. These are, we cannot, and that's what he's saying, that we cannot now say that we wish we had done that. Because we've lost that chance of saying, we wish we had done that. We didn't do that. So now we are faced with a situation which is a result of the fact that we didn't do that. So what do we do now? So Nehruvian secularism, an imposition in the sense that it was not the result of negotiation between different communities, even prior to independence. Secularism given, procedural priority, but no substantive authority. Precisely the point of, freedom, some vague sense of political freedom given procedural priority over, the substantive thinking out of what a free India, would mean to the Indians of free India. So these are very, very serious points, but unfortunately we do not have the, either the patience or the time or the will. The first thing is the will, see? First thing is the will to, reflect on this problems. So hence a holding, that is why it's a holding process. Precisely, yes.
So the question is not clear to me. So lots of provisions are there in the constitution which ensures the political justice, political equality. Political justice and political equality. Even there is uniform civil code. So uniform civil code. So uniform civil code. So as all of you know, this thing, uniform civil code is in directives. One of the directives given by the constitution to the state. So these provisions, both these provisions, the political justice or political equality and the directive principles, say put it in constitution, original constitution. So these two provisions, if I take these two provisions, these are conflicting actually. So even very recently, Supreme Court is given verdict on this particular issue. This is unconstitutional. Means 3 talaqs, regarding 3 talaqs. How the Supreme Court, the apex court is given, can give this type of verdict? This is a very big question for me. Though fundamental rights, these are justiciable again, have given these rights to us. Okay, this is a very big question for me. I couldn't find the answer.
This is a constitutive tension we have not been able to resolve, because you see why the Supreme Court is easy to answer. Because in India, when it took the secular model, the idea was that a neutral, autonomous judiciary will actually oversee the working of the separation of religion and politics. Okay, hence this, this power was given to an autonomous and a neutral judiciary, precisely to see, and not just that, also to balance between the executive and the legislature. So the judiciary was given, tremendous powers in that sense, in independent India, as a system of checks and balances. Absolutely.
Supreme Court is the chief arbiter of the constitutional.
Yes, yes, yes. So as I mentioned, with regard to the Indian Constitution, some scholars have said that that is why all the others should learn from India, because they are doing something very daring, which is bringing together two apparently completely incompatible clauses in the same constitution, in the same place. But so yes, it can cause problems. But on the other hand, as something else we forget, in India, because of, let's say, the entitlement of the sense of majority of the Hindus, it could be done. The Hindu code will, the reform of that, although as feminist scholars have pointed out, it had nothing to do in particular about women. It was to bring uniformity, let's say, to a very extremely heterogeneous community. Now, what we forget is this idea of the minority, being a minority, not just the Muslims, even the others who have it, they feel so much under pressure, so much under threat, that the personal laws, which even they realize, do not work that well, have become a key element of their identity. We often forget that, as I said, the sense of vulnerability. And why do I say that? In other countries, Islamic countries or not openly Islamic countries, but where Muslims are the minority, they've all gone through, because if you look at colonial histories, it is, this existence of the personal law, the family law as personal law, is operative in several other societies, including Egypt. Okay, wherever you had, the British or some other European, but primarily the British ruling. And many of those countries have actually changed their personal laws without this, without the slightest problem, because there it is not a key element of their minority identity. You see what I mean? We don't get to look, we don't get to think, we don't have to. We have to, as I said, we always have to ask why, this is happening. Why is it that personal laws, which we all know need to be, because it's a system coming down, let's say, from the late 18th century, why it has become such, a key element of the identity of it. Like, these are the questions Vinadas is also asking. But whose collective, whose culture, who decides, that this is the culture of the community, which has been marked out as a minority for all time to come? And these are our questions. You see, these are our questions that we have to really very seriously think of and reflect on. And hopefully at some stage, we will come into a dialogue and maybe work out a better, viable option, alternative, as Bill Rami is pointing to. So this is why, as I said, it was not only insufficiently thought out, it was also not negotiated by listening to all the other voices and communities who had very different notions. So Bill Rami's point to call attention to the Congress High Command's thinking about secularism as a horizon on which any conception of a negotiated ideal of secularism was not so much as visible is very, very important, right? On the other hand, the comprehensive nature of the Congress Party, something I mentioned just before, the idea that the Congress Party is a comprehensive all-India party also probably caused this blind spot on the part of the Congress leaders. I'm sure there were other issues, there were other factors, but the thing is, it insisted on being an all-India and absolutely representative of all India. And all these problems, many problems resulted from that, not just this, okay? So, on the other hand, the comprehensive nature of the Congress Party led it to assume that an implicitly or tacitly conducted negotiation was inherent in the party's claims. That is the problem. inherently or tacitly conducted negotiation. And that's what he's harping on again and again. That is not a proper, it's this idea of the secular or any vision is not a properly negotiated one based on consensus. If it had been, as I said, we can only ask ourselves, what if it had been based on a properly negotiated consensus? We don't know. It probably would have been much better, right? So, but this does not link the assumption of compositeness with substantive secularism. Secularism arising from that's the important thing. Secularism, therefore, this idea of it being based on a real compromise, right, is what he calls substantive secularism, where you pay attention to the earlier layers through which this idea has taken root, this idea or faith of the people in, has taken roots, which is when it gets fused, let's say, into the polity in a very different way. Yes, that is substantive for him, secularism. So secularism arising from a creative playing out of a communitarian politics prevalent at a particular historical juncture. Remember, I always say that, this pejorative sense of the communal, I don't buy it, because there's nothing wrong with, drawing upon what we think are certain elements of, community identity. It can be anything, but it can also simultaneously be religion, right? So this communitarian, a proper playing out of a communitarian politics prevalent at a particular juncture. That's why I say it's constantly change. We have to depend. The problem is Giovanni Levi said it very well, several years ago. The micro historia specialist, right? He used to come to Mexico at some point almost every year. He says, we, the scholars, spend years, trying to say, find out, reflecting, etc., saying why, Hitler and Stalin were not similar. But by then, a journalist had made the statement, and everyone has believed or not believed, but several years ago. So you work for 5 years, it comes to nothing. Nobody is listening to you, which is true. That's so that's the problem, which is why should not be just an academic debate, as I said, but it's probably. But if all of you, if all of us, not you, if all of us at least started thinking, reflecting on these questions, ways, as I said, maybe we'll relate to the issues, we'll get agitated in different ways, we will react in different ways, and I think that's one step forward, if not anything else, right? So, a secularism that accepts the reality. See, this is the vital point, which is why also I gave it for the abstract, the topic. A secularism that accepts the reality of the inseparability of religion from politics as its starting point. So it's saying we should come from the other end, absolutely, which is why to work out a viable solution. So just Nandi, by citing Gandhi, you also thought that, he said it, right? Politics without religion is no politics at all, right? But just by citing Nandi and, blaming the modern is not going to solve our problems at all. That's what he's saying, it's missing the point completely, because there's no engagement, actual engagement, although he claims that he is engaging and not with the academics and, scholars, but that's what he's saying. So can't we start from the premise, which is what we've been pointing to throughout this, entire course, that, religion and politics can, separation works only at a very discursive level and not in actual social worlds, right? So if we were to first accept that and start from there, what kind of a notion of the secular would we arrive at? This is a very big question that he puts forth, but as I said, a question that we have to very seriously, deal with if we consider ourselves, concerned, engaged human beings, right? Given the situation all over the world, not just here. Why intolerance? As I said, the things he says that as if religion as a way of life, faith, naturally resulted in tolerance, And religion as ideology naturally results in violence and intolerance. Constructs, right? Where are all the people who believe in religion and faith and also believe in religion as an ideology? Why do we have no? There's nothing like pure, let's say tolerance and absolute complete violence. There are mixes, and we have to ask when, where, who's coming from where and why. And so I think the most important point Pilgrami is saying that let's start with the premise that religion and politics, are inseparable. And then conceive of a notion of the secular. Secular, as you know, is in the sense of not the divide, all the secularization process, everything, science and secular knowledge, etc., etc., etc. Let's stop at that. Let me put this away first. So if anyone wants to come to the defense of Nandi, I'd be most willing to hear it. As I say, I love and respect him a lot. I say love because I sort of say that he's very indulgent towards you, that he just listens to whatever you say.
I have a question. I think, which context, which example can you give me where we find the way of secularism? Give me a context, define secularism, and show me the empirical evidence of secularism on the ground.
Even in a communist state where we talk about the absence of secularism, that has not bred tolerance. So why are we putting the blame on religion being a very important component of leading to violence and intolerance? I mean, in contexts where